Okay, hi everyone. I am Forrest Simon. To continue with some of Queenie's final notes, there are a lot of people who should be thanked, some of which Sarah Winston, Sarah Dansinger, also my dog Henry. His company was only had for a couple of these photos, but I think his presence and his sensibilities are felt in all of them. The project I'm sharing focuses on landscapes in flux, places that don't fall neatly into our typical categories of wild or ruined, natural or artificial. These are spaces that are shaped by human hands and often reshaped again and again. Construction sites grown over, forest converted into farmland before finding its way back to being wooded, roadside ditches gone thick with bittersweet and knotweed. I began this project because I was interested in what we overlook, land that is too easily passed by or dismissed as nothing. I kept finding myself drawn to these edge zones where different land uses bleed together. They're messy, contradictory, and deeply alive. Robert Adams wrote in Why People Photograph that, quote, "The goal of art is to convey a vision of coherence and peace. But the effort to develop that vision starts in the more common experiences of confusion and pain." That is the emotional terrain I find myself trying to work in. There's a kind of quiet unease in these places. The berm around a quarry, a struggling meadow beneath an overpass, an ill-conceived lawn, they are all markers of instability, and they reflect our changing relationship with land. They're also places where something stubborn is still growing. And sometimes that persistence, whether it's a patch of Queen Anne's lace or a slowly encroaching tree line, can feel strangely hopeful. These indicators of robust life push back against erasure. They complicate what we mean when we talk about ruin or recovery. These sites challenge the idea that a place needs to be pristine to be valuable or worthy of attention. To me, these hybrid places tell us more about our culture than any postcard view ever could. Robert Adams also writes that we catch ourselves thinking in the bitterness that can accompany the unexpected sound of an aluminum can bending underfoot, that it would have been merciful if Columbus had been wrong and the world flat, with an edge from which to fall, rather than a circular cage that returns us to our mistakes. That line sits with me when I photograph sites of ecological damage. There's a frustration at how easily we repeat ourselves, but also a stubborn hope that we might begin to see things differently if we just look more closely. My process is slow and physical. I often find myself inching towards a vantage point through dense brush, kneeling beside water, climbing a berm, or circling a thicket looking for the right arrangement. The camera helps me make sense of it all. It helps me break up a chaotic space into something legible. But that urge to order things, to impose clarity, creates a tension. It's never clean. Wind shifts, a truck drives by, a cloud rolls in overhead. The illusion too easily falls apart. There's a quote from Frank Golke I return to often. "Whatever else a photograph may be about, it is always about time." This is something I try to play with in my work. These are not just visual records. They're moments of encounter, temporary and contingent. These encounters vary in their brevity to the camera. Some last 1/100th of a second, while others last 15 minutes. This difference in time frame may seem extreme to us, and in some ways it is. But land often operates on a very different time scale, one that is noisier and far more patient. And the human trace in these photos, a net of steel beams, stretching ATV trails, a hunting blind, and the impending reach of a quarry, reminds us that our time is folded into that much longer ecological timeline. Poet and environmentalist Gary Snyder describes land as a palimpsest, a surface that's been scratched over and rewritten again and again. That idea has stayed with me, especially in places where the marks of the past haven't been erased, just buried under new intentions. These are sites that have been farmed, paved, abandoned, and reclaimed, but each layer matters. A place might hold the rows of a former cornfield, a rock wall from former sheep pasture, the home of some caring individuals, a stand of oaks and chestnuts, and for now, a group of pigs. Each of those layers tells its own story. And sometimes those layers conflict. One suggests care, another neglect. One marks extraction, another regeneration. And I think part of the work of photographing is not resolving these contradictions, but learning to stand with them. Conservation and conservation work far too often ignores land use entirely, even though most land is being used and used badly. We love the idea of saving something abstract and something impressive. It's easy to rally individuals to save the national parks or polar bears or the Amazon, and all of these are very worthwhile causes. But at the same time, focusing entirely on these issues makes it all too easy to overlook what is happening immediately around us. These facts, the ones close to home, are often some of the easiest to resolve, but the most difficult to reconcile. And it's in these uncomfortable, ordinary places, like along abandoned railroad tracks in the shadow of a country club, that we see the real effects of policy, industry, and culture playing out on the land. William Cronin put it quite simply in his essay, The Trouble with Wilderness, writing that idealizing a distant wilderness too often means not idealizing the environment in which we actually live, the landscape that for better or worse we call home. I take that very seriously in my work. I'm not photographing national parks or untouched nature. I'm photographing sites of interruption and ecological liminality, spaces that carry traces of labor, neglect, and reinvention. If wilderness is to be anything more than a distant spectacle, then it has to be part of where we live. That recentering of wildness, not as escape, but as a presence, is something I'm trying to explore in my images. In some ways, my photographs document that tension. They show the marks we've made and what's growing in between them. They also reveal something personal, the urge I feel to impose a narrative, to make a discordant space feel composed and knowable. Sometimes the camera lets me do that. Other times, it reminds me that the land is refusing to stay still. There's a continual tug that I feel between the world I wish to see and the world that is in front of me, the world I have to look at. Photography, in my mind, sits right in this gap. I think what I'm really photographing is a slow conversation, a back and forth between change and renewal, between control and acceptance. These landscapes are not heroic, but they're alive. They don't offer transcendence, but they do offer presence, and I believe that sometimes presence is enough. To return one last time to Robert Adams, at our best and most fortunate, we make pictures because of what stands before our camera, to honor what is greater and more interesting than we are. We never accomplished this perfectly, though in return we are given something perfect, a sense of inclusion. That is how I hope my work functions, as a way of honoring what is too easily overlooked, as an attempt to see clearly, not to fix, not to rescue, but to witness and to ask others to witness with me. Thank you.
Question for Forrest. You quoted that Frank Wilkie quote about photographs always being about time. You talked about the slow pace of your process. Given your subject matter, do you see your process as an attempt to capture non-human timescales? in the landscape in your work, or is the attempt always kind of
Yeah, I like that question. Thank you. I think I'm not attempting to capture that non-human timescale, but I think it's always going to be present. And I think that was actually a fairly big help for my project, because a lot of the spaces, you see one final image, but they came about after many visits to that one spot, because it can be just very difficult to come about with a photo that you're very happy with. And so, I mean, in the moment, it's very much just about getting that photo, and I wasn't too concerned about any sort of time scale, except for, you know, the one the camera was concerned with, like how long it was taking me with each like press of the shutter. But then when it came to putting together the body of the work and really theorizing about it, I realized how important those sort of different visible timescales were.
So I'm going to close it out here. And I just want to close out by saying to all of you, this talk tonight was not a requirement of anyone. It was based upon everyone's interest in doing so. And I just want to applaud your courage in doing this, because it's hard to talk to an audience, but it's also so important because many of your peers are here who will be giving senior projects, and you're pulling back the curtain so that they can also know what to expect. So I just want to say thank you. And thank you for a great year and helping me learn how to do this better. And congratulations. And thanks again for coming out tonight.